The woman stepped off the stagecoach in Placerville, California, cradling her left arm against her chest, and the tall cowboy waiting at the station felt his heart drop when he realized his mail-order bride had arrived injured. June 1872 brought scorching heat to the Sierra Nevada foothills, and Josephine Kane had been standing in the dusty street for nearly an hour, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the relentless sun. He had memorized every word of Sarah Graham's letters over the past 6 months, her elegant handwriting describing her life in Boston, her love of books, her desire for adventure and a fresh start. What she had not mentioned in her most recent correspondence was that she would be arriving with her arm bound in a sling, her face pale with obvious pain. Sarah's green eyes met his brown ones as she carefully descended the stage-coach steps, her traveling dress dusty from the long journey. She was prettier than the photograph she had sent, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet and freckles across her nose that the sepia tone had failed to capture. But the way she held herself, so careful and guarded, made Josephine's chest tighten with concern. "Miss Graham?" he asked, stepping forward quickly. "I am Josephine Kane, but everyone calls me Joe." "Mr. Kane," she replied, her voice soft but steady despite the exhaustion evident in her features. "I apologize for my condition. There was an accident 3 weeks ago just before I was supposed to depart. A horse spooked on the street and I was knocked down. The doctor said it was a clean break and should heal well, but I had already made all the arrangements and I was afraid if I delayed, you might think I had changed my mind." Joe reached for her traveling bag with one hand and offered her his other arm for support. "Madam, I would have waited. I would have understood. You should not have traveled in such a state." Sarah allowed him to guide her away from the stagecoach, where other passengers were collecting their belongings and greeting their own waiting parties. "I wanted to come. I needed to come. Boston held nothing for me anymore, not after my father passed. The boarding house where I was living was being sold, and I had nowhere else to go. Your letters gave me hope, Mr. Kane. I was not about to let a broken arm steal that from me." The vulnerability in her words struck something deep in Joe's chest. He had lost his own parents 5 years ago to influenza, and he understood that particular kind of loneliness. "Then I am glad you came, Miss Graham, but we need to get you somewhere comfortable. How is the pain?" "Manageable," she said, though he noticed the way she winced when someone jostled past them in the crowded street. "The laudanum the doctor gave me helps, but it makes me terribly foggy." Joe made a decision quickly. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It is a good property with a solid house, but the ride might be rough on you right now. There is a hotel here in town, the Carey House. What if we got you a room there for tonight, let you rest, and we can talk about everything tomorrow when you are feeling stronger?" Relief flooded Sarah's face. "That would be very kind. I confess I am exhausted. Then that is what we will do." Joe guided her down Main Street, carrying her bag easily despite its weight. Placerville bustled with activity on this Saturday afternoon. Miners, merchants, and families moved along the wooden sidewalks. The sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons, competing with the ring of a blacksmith's hammer and the general din of conversation. The Carey House was one of the nicer establishments in town, a 3-story building that had survived the devastating fire of 1856. Joe secured Sarah a room on the 2nd floor, paying for 3 nights in advance, despite her protests. "You are in no condition to be making decisions about our future right now," he said gently as he carried her bag up the stairs. "Take the time you need to heal and rest. We can talk when you are ready." Sarah paused at the door to her room, studying him with those remarkable green eyes. "You are very kind, Mr. Kane. Your letters suggested you were a good man, but actions speak louder than words. Thank you." Joe felt his ears grow warm. "I will be gentle with you, Miss Graham. That is a promise. You have been through enough without me adding to your troubles." He left her then, despite wanting to stay and make sure she had everything she needed. Propriety demanded distance, especially before they were married. But as he walked back down to the street where he had tied his horse, Joe could not stop thinking about the way Sarah had looked at him, grateful and hopeful despite her obvious pain. The next morning, Joe returned to the Carey house with breakfast from the restaurant downstairs and fresh flowers he had purchased from a vendor on the street. He knocked softly on Sarah's door, half expecting her to still be asleep. "Come in," her voice called, stronger than it had been yesterday. Sarah was sitting in a chair by the window, already dressed in a fresh gown of deep blue. Her arm remained in its sling, but her color looked better and her hair was neatly arranged. The morning light caught the red undertones, making it glow like burnished copper. "Good morning," Joe said, suddenly feeling awkward with the flowers in his hand. "I brought breakfast and these. I thought they might brighten the room." Sarah's smile transformed her entire face. "They are beautiful. No one has brought me flowers since my father used to pick wildflowers for my mother when I was a child. Please sit. We should talk." Joe arranged the flowers in the water pitcher and pulled a chair closer to hers, setting the food between them. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks, truthfully. The bed is comfortable, and knowing I have finally arrived, that the journey is over, helped me relax." Sarah picked at the toast with her good hand. "Mr. Kane, I need to be honest with you about my situation. My father was a clerk. He left me almost nothing when he died. The money I had saved from my work as a seamstress barely covered the cost of my travel here. I have $16 to my name and the contents of that traveling bag. If you have changed your mind about our arrangement, I would understand. I am not the healthy, capable bride you were expecting." Joe leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Miss Graham, let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who was brave enough to travel 2,000 miles to start a new life. I see someone who did not let a broken arm stop her from keeping her word. I see a lady with strength and determination, even when she is in pain. That is exactly the kind of partner I hoped for." Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes. "You are very generous to say so. I mean every word." Joe reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her right hand in his. "I am not a wealthy man, Miss Graham. I have a ranch with about 200 head of cattle, a house that is sturdy but simple, and enough land to grow what we need. I work hard and I do well enough, but I cannot offer you luxury. What I can offer is respect, partnership, and a life we build together. The question is, now that you are here and you have seen me, is that what you still want?" Sarah squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "It is everything I want, Mr. Kane. I grew up poor. Luxury holds no appeal for me, but a home, a partner, a purpose, that is worth more than gold." They spent the next hour talking, really talking in a way their letters had only hinted at. Sarah described her childhood in Boston, the daughter of a clerk and a washerwoman who had worked herself to death when Sarah was 12. She spoke of taking over her mother's sewing to help support her father, of the boarding house rooms that grew smaller and colder each winter, of watching her father fade after a lung illness took hold. Joe shared his own story, of growing up on the ranch that had belonged to his parents, of learning the cattle business from his father, and the art of turning a house into a home from his mother. He spoke honestly about the hard winter that had taken them both, of the years he had spent alone except for his ranch hand, Miguel, who had been with the family for 15 years. "I placed the advertisement for a bride because the loneliness was becoming unbearable," Joe admitted. The work is fine. I enjoy the cattle, the land, even the hard days. But coming home to an empty house, having no one to share my thoughts with, no one to care if I lived or died beyond whether the bills got paid, that wore on me. I wanted a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with. That is exactly what I wanted too, Sarah said softly. After my father died, I realized I had been living half a life, working to survive but not really living. Your letters painted a picture of a different kind of existence. Hard work, yes, but with purpose. With someone beside me instead of always being alone. Joe smiled. Then I think we are of one mind, Miss Graham. Please call me Sarah. If we are to be married, we should use our given names. Only if you call me Joe. They settled into a comfortable silence, finishing their breakfast as morning gave way to midday. Finally, Sarah asked the question that had been hanging between them. When did you want to marry, Joe? I know we discussed doing so shortly after I arrived, but given my condition, perhaps we should wait. Joe considered this carefully. What do you want, Sarah? Truly, she met his eyes directly. I want to marry you as soon as possible. Not because of propriety or necessity, but because I have been waiting to start my new life. I do not want to waste another day, but I also understand if you want to wait until my arm is healed. A bride who cannot fully participate in her own wedding is hardly ideal. You will be participating by being there and saying yes, Joe said firmly. If you are certain, we could marry tomorrow. I would need to speak with Reverend Thompson today, but he is a reasonable man. We could have a simple ceremony, nothing elaborate. Miguel and his wife Rosa could serve as witnesses. Then we could come back here for another night or two until you feel strong enough for the ride to the ranch. Hope lit Sarah's face. You would do that. You would not mind a wedding with no frills, no celebration. I care about marrying you, Sarah. The rest is just decoration. Joe stood, still holding her hand. Let me make the arrangements. You rest today. Tomorrow, if you are willing, we will become husband and wife. Sarah rose as well, somewhat unsteadily, and Joe quickly steadied her with a hand at her waist. They stood close, closer than propriety strictly allowed, and Joe could smell the lavender water she used in her hair. I am willing, Sarah whispered. I am very willing indeed. Joe wanted to kiss her then, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him. But he also remembered his promise to be gentle, to take care with her. So instead, he lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. Then I will see you tomorrow, Sarah Graham. And the next time we speak, you will be Sarah Kane. He left before his resolve could weaken, heading straight for the church on the edge of town. Reverend Thompson, a kind man in his 50s, listened to Joe's request and agreed immediately to perform the ceremony the next afternoon. From there, Joe rode out to his ranch to tell Miguel and Rosa the news and to make sure the house was as ready as possible for Sarah's arrival. Miguel, a stocky man with gray threading through his black hair, grinned widely at the news. Finally, Rosa has been saying you needed a wife for years. We will make sure everything is perfect, patron. Rosa, his wife of 30 years, was even more enthusiastic. She immediately began planning what food she would prepare, what flowers she would gather, how she would make sure the house welcomed its new mistress properly. This poor girl, arriving hurt like that. You must take such good care of her, Josephine. She is trusting you with everything. I know, Rosa. I intend to be worthy of that trust. Joe spent the rest of the day helping Miguel with the cattle and then cleaning the house from top to bottom. His parents' home was well built, constructed of solid timber with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. It had 3 bedrooms, a main room that served for cooking and living, and a front porch that looked out over the valley. Joe had maintained it well over the years, but now he saw it through Sarah's eyes and found it wanting. The furniture was sturdy but plain. The windows had no curtains. The walls were bare. It was a bachelor's dwelling, functional but without warmth or personality. Rosa must have noticed his dismay because she patted his arm reassuringly. A house becomes a home when it is lived in with love. Your mother used to say that. Give your Sarah time and she will make this place bloom. You will see. That night, Joe barely slept. He kept thinking about Sarah alone in that hotel room, about the trust she was placing in him, about the life they were about to begin. Part of him worried he was rushing her, that she had agreed only because she had nowhere else to go. But another part remembered the way she had looked at him, the warmth in her voice, the hope in her eyes. She wanted this as much as he did. They were both taking a leap of faith together. The next afternoon, Joe dressed in his best suit, a dark gray affair he had worn to his parents' funerals and not since. He polished his boots until they shone and even trimmed his beard, which had grown somewhat wild over the past months. Miguel and Rosa rode into town with him in the wagon, Rosa carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered that morning. Sarah was waiting in the hotel lobby, and Joe's breath caught at the sight of her. She wore a dress of pale green that brought out her eyes, and someone, probably the hotel keeper's wife, had arranged her hair in an elaborate style with small white flowers woven through it. Her arm remained in its sling, but she held a small bouquet of roses that matched the ones Joe had brought her yesterday. "You look beautiful," Joe said, and meant it with his whole heart. Sarah blushed prettily. "You look very handsome yourself. I confess I am nervous." "So am I," Joe admitted, offering her his good arm. "But I think that is natural. We are making a life-changing decision today." "The best decision," Sarah corrected, accepting his support. They walked together to the church, Miguel and Rosa following discreetly behind. The little white chapel sat on a hill overlooking Placerville, its steeple reaching toward the cloudless blue sky. Inside, it was cool and quiet, light streaming through the simple windows in golden shafts. Reverend Thompson waited at the altar, his prayer book open. "Welcome, my children. This is a joyous occasion, the joining of two lives in holy matrimony. Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple but profound. Joe made his vows clearly, promising to love, honor, and cherish Sarah for all his days. When Sarah spoke her own promises, her voice trembled slightly but never wavered. She meant every word. Joe could see it in her eyes. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Joe cupped Sarah's face gently in both hands, mindful of her injury, and kissed her softly. Her lips were warm and sweet, and when they parted, both of them were smiling. "Mr. and Mrs. Josephine Kane," the Reverend announced, beaming. "May God bless your union." Miguel and Rosa congratulated them enthusiastically, Rosa crying happy tears and insisting on hugging them both. They all walked back to town together, and Joe treated everyone to an early dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a small celebration, but it felt right, intimate and warm. As evening approached, Miguel and Rosa prepared to return to the ranch. "You take your time," Miguel told Joe quietly. "The cattle will keep another day or two. Let your bride rest and grow strong." After they left, Joe walked Sarah back to her room, suddenly uncertain. They were married now, but she was still injured and exhausted from the day's events. He did not want to presume anything or make demands she was not ready to meet. Sarah seemed to sense his hesitation. At her door, she turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "Joe, I know this is our wedding night and there are expectations. But I am very tired and my arm is paining me considerably. Would you think me a terrible wife if I asked if we could wait before we truly begin our marriage?" Relief flooded through Joe, mixed with tenderness. "Sarah, I would never think that. I want you to be healed and comfortable." I told you I would be gentle with you, and I meant it. We have the rest of our lives. There is no rush." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was so worried you would be angry or disappointed." "Never." Joe brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "May I stay with you, though?" "Not for anything improper, but just to be near you. I could sleep in that chair. I just want to make sure you are all right through the night." "I would like that very much." Sarah opened the door, and they entered the room together as husband and wife for the first time. Joe helped Sarah out of her shoes and got her settled comfortably in bed, still fully dressed except for her boots. He removed his jacket and boots as well and settled into the chair by the window, stretching his long legs out before him. "Tell me about the ranch," Sarah asked sleepily. "I want to picture my new home." So Joe described it in detail. The rolling hills dotted with oak trees, the creek that ran along the southern boundary, the pastures where the cattle grazed, the mountains visible in the distance on clear days. He talked about the changing seasons, the work that filled each day, the simple pleasures of that life. Sarah listened with her eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips, and gradually her breathing deepened into sleep. Joe watched her for a long time, this brave woman who had become his wife, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. He would take care of her. He would make sure she never regretted her decision to come west and tie her life to his. They stayed in town for 3 more days. Each morning, Joe brought Sarah breakfast and they talked for hours, learning each other's habits and preferences, sharing stories from their pasts, planning for their future. Each afternoon they would take a short walk around Placerville, Sarah leaning on Joe's arm, slowly regaining her strength. Each evening Joe stayed with her, sleeping in the chair despite her protests that it must be uncomfortable. On the 3rd night, Sarah finally put her foot down. "Joe Kane, you are going to ruin your back sleeping in that chair. This bed is more than large enough for both of us, and we are married. Please sleep here beside me. I trust you completely." Joe hesitated, but his back was indeed aching from the awkward sleeping position. "Are you certain?" "I am very certain. I actually would sleep better knowing you were comfortable." So Joe lay down beside his wife, carefully maintaining space between them, and discovered that Sarah was right. It was much more comfortable. More than that, there was something deeply satisfying about being close to her, hearing her gentle breathing, feeling the warmth of another person beside him after so many years alone. In the middle of the night, Joe woke to find Sarah had shifted in her sleep and was now curled against his side, her head on his shoulder and her good arm draped across his chest. His own arm had wrapped around her protectively. For a moment, he considered moving away, but Sarah murmured contentedly in her sleep and nestled closer. So he stayed where he was and fell back asleep more peacefully than he had in years. The next morning, Sarah woke first and found herself entangled with her husband. She knew she should probably be embarrassed, but instead she felt safe and warm. Joe's chest rose and fell steadily beneath her cheek, and his arm around her felt right, like coming home. When Joe's eyes opened, they looked at each other for a long moment. Then Joe smiled, that slow, warm smile that made Sarah's heart skip. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." Sarah made no move to pull away, and neither did Joe. They lay there together, comfortable and content, until the morning light grew stronger and the sounds of the town waking up filtered through the window. "I think I am ready," Sarah said finally. "To go to the ranch, I mean. My arm still aches, but it is bearable, and I want to see my new home." "Then we will go today," Joe decided. "I will rent a wagon so the ride will be easier on you than horseback. We can take our time, stop if you need to rest." They had breakfast together one last time at the hotel restaurant. Then Joe went to arrange for a wagon while Sarah packed her few belongings. By mid-morning, They were heading out of Placerville, following the road that wound through the foothills toward Joe's ranch. The June day was beautiful, warm but not oppressively hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wild grasses and wildflowers. Sarah sat beside Joe on the wagon seat, watching the landscape roll past with fascination. She had lived her entire life in a city, surrounded by buildings and crowds. This open country, with its vast skies and distant horizons, was like entering another world. "It is so quiet," she marveled. "I can hear birds singing. In Boston, all you heard was people and wagons and factory noise." Joe grinned. "You will hear plenty of noise at the ranch, but it is a different kind. Cattle lowing, horses whinnying, the wind in the trees. I find it peaceful." "I think I will too." Sarah leaned against him slightly, enjoying the solid warmth of his shoulder. "Tell me about Miguel and Rosa." "What are they like?" "Good people, the best. Miguel came to work for my father 20 years ago when I was just a boy. He taught me as much about ranching as my father did. Rosa joined him after they married, and she helped my mother with everything from cooking to tending the garden to doctoring when someone got hurt. After my parents died, they stayed on, and I honestly do not know what I would have done without them. They feel like family more than employees." "Do they live on the ranch?" "They have a cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house. Close enough to be helpful, far enough for privacy. Miguel jokes that it keeps Rosa from trying to mother me too much, but honestly, I appreciate her attention. She makes sure I eat properly and keeps the house from becoming a complete disaster when I get busy with the cattle." Sarah heard the affection in Joe's voice and felt her own affection for these people she had not even met yet. Anyone who had cared for Joe through his grief and loneliness was already dear to her. They stopped halfway to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Joe helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hands careful around her waist. They found a shady spot beneath an oak tree and sat together, sharing water from a canteen and the sandwiches the hotel had packed for them. "Are you all right?" Joe asked, studying Sarah's face for signs of pain or exhaustion. "We can rest here as long as you need." "I am fine, truly." "Better than fine." Sarah looked out at the rolling hills, the patches of wildflowers, the blue sky overhead. "I feel like I can breathe here, like there is space for me in the world. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Joe covered her hand with his. "I felt that way when I came home after traveling to Sacramento once. The city was too crowded, too loud, too much. I needed this open space to feel like myself again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Sarah found herself studying Joe's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. He was a handsome man, but more than that, he was kind and patient and gentle. Every interaction they had reinforced that these were not just words but the truth of who he was. Joe caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Sarah felt herself blush, but decided to be honest. "I was thinking how fortunate I am. How easily this could have gone differently. You could have been cruel or demanding or any number of terrible things. Instead, you are exactly the man your letters suggested. It seems almost too good to be true." Joe turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "Sarah, I was thinking the same thing about you. You could have been cold or harsh or resentful of your circumstances. Instead, you are brave and kind and genuine. I know we barely know each other yet, but I already care for you deeply. I want you to be happy here. I want to build a real marriage with you, not just a practical arrangement." "I want that too," Sarah whispered. Then, gathering her courage, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was different from their brief kiss at the wedding. This was longer, deeper, full of promise. Joe's hand came up to cup the back of her head, careful not to jostle her injured arm, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made Sarah's heart race. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. Joe rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably continue to the ranch before I forget myself entirely." Sarah laughed softly. "Probably wise." They climbed back into the wagon and continued their journey, but something had shifted between them. They sat closer now, Sarah's good hand resting on Joe's thigh, his arm occasionally coming around her shoulders when the road grew rough. They were becoming not just husband and wife on paper, but true partners. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Sarah caught her breath at the sight. The house sat in a small valley, surrounded by pastureland where cattle grazed peacefully. Trees dotted the landscape, providing shade and beauty. A creek sparkled in the sunlight, and in the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky. "It is beautiful," Sarah breathed. "Joe, it is truly beautiful." Pride and pleasure filled Joe's expression. "Welcome home, Sarah." As they approached, Rosa came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Miguel emerged from the barn, leading a horse he had apparently been grooming. Both broke into wide smiles at the sight of the wagon. Joe pulled up in front of the house and jumped down, then carefully lifted Sarah from the seat, his hands strong and sure around her waist. He set her down gently, keeping one arm around her for support. Rosa hurried over and took both of Sarah's hands, mindful of the injured arm. "Welcome, welcome. You poor dear, traveling so far and injured too. Come inside, I have made everything ready for you." Miguel shook Joe's hand and clapped him on the shoulder. "Good to have you back, patron. And good to have a lady in the house again. Your mother would be very happy." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the warm welcome. She had been alone for so long, and now suddenly she had not just a husband but what felt like family. Rosa ushered her into the house, chattering about the food she had prepared and the changes she had made to welcome the new bride. Sarah looked around the main room, taking in the sturdy furniture, the stone fireplace, the large windows that let in abundant light. It was simple but comfortable, exactly as Joe had described. "I know it needs a woman's touch," Rosa said, a bit anxiously. "But you will make it beautiful, I am sure. And if your arm, it is healing well." "It is healing," Sarah assured her. "The doctor said 6 weeks for the bone to knit, and it has been just over 3 already. I should be able to remove the sling in another 3 weeks or so." Rosa nodded approvingly. "Good, good. You must be careful, though, not to use it too soon. I will help you with everything you need until you are well." Joe and Miguel came in carrying Sarah's traveling bag and a few supplies Joe had purchased in town. "Let me show you the rest of the house," Joe said, offering Sarah his arm. He led her through the main room to a hallway that opened onto the bedrooms. "My parents' room, which is now our room," he said, opening a door to reveal a spacious chamber with a large bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the valley. "The bed was my grandmother's, brought across the plains in a wagon. The frame comes apart for traveling, which is how they managed it. The mattress is new, though, only a few years old." The room was clean but sparse, clearly a man's room. No decorations adorned the walls, no curtains softened the windows, no personal touches made it feel lived in beyond the basic necessities. "I know it needs work," Joe said, sounding uncertain. "I have not done much with it since my parents died. I could not bear to change their things at first, and then after enough time passed, it just seemed pointless when I was alone. But now that you are here, we can make it ours. Buy whatever you need, arrange it however you like." Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the view, stunning in its simple beauty. "I love it already. And yes, Perhaps we can add some curtains, maybe a rug. But Joe, this is wonderful. I have never had a room this nice in my entire life." Relief flooded Joe's face. He showed her the other 2 bedrooms, both smaller but still pleasant, and then the back door that led to a large garden area currently growing wild. "Rosa has her own vegetable garden near her cabin, but my mother used to grow flowers here. Roses mostly, but also hollyhocks and daisies and all manner of things. If you wanted to revive it, I am sure Rosa would help you. She has been saving seeds for years, hoping someone would bring the garden back to life." "I would love that," Sarah said immediately. "My mother used to say that flowers were as necessary as bread, that they fed the soul instead of the body. I have not had the chance to grow anything in years, living in boarding houses." They returned to the main room where Rosa had laid out an impressive spread of food on the large wooden table. Fresh bread, roasted chicken, vegetables, a pie that smelled of apples and cinnamon. "You must be starving after your journey," she fussed. "Sit, sit, eat." The 4 of them shared the meal together, and Sarah began to understand the dynamic of this little household. Miguel and Rosa treated Joe with a combination of respect and familial affection, and Joe clearly reciprocated. They discussed the ranch business openly, Miguel reporting on the cattle and asking Joe's opinion on various matters. Rosa shared news from town that she had gathered on her last shopping trip, and asked Sarah about her preferences for meals and household routines. It was comfortable and warm, nothing like the formal, stiff interactions Sarah had observed in wealthier Boston households where servants knew their place and never presumed friendship with their employers. This was something different, something better. After the meal, Rosa insisted on showing Sarah where everything was kept in the kitchen, explaining her systems and asking what Sarah might want changed. "This is your home now," she said firmly. "I am here to help, but you are the mistress. Whatever you want, we make happen." Sarah was moved by the older woman's kindness. "Rosa, I have no wish to disrupt what works. You have been doing this for years. Please, teach me your ways and we will work together." Rosa beamed and pulled Sarah into a careful hug, mindful of her arm. "You are a good girl." I told Josephine he was lucky and I was right. As evening approached, Miguel and Rosa took their leave, returning to their cabin. Suddenly, Sarah and Joe were alone in the house together, truly alone for the first time since their wedding. Joe stoked the fire in the fireplace, though the June evening was not cold, and lit several lamps to push back the gathering darkness. Sarah sat in a rocking chair near the hearth, exhaustion from the long day beginning to catch up with her. "You should rest," Joe said, noticing the fatigue in her expression. "Let me help you get settled in bed." In the bedroom, Joe turned his back while Sarah managed to change into her nightgown with difficulty, struggling with the buttons one-handed. "Joe, I am sorry, but could you help me? I cannot quite manage the fastenings." Joe turned around, and Sarah saw the way his eyes darkened as he took in her state of partial undress. But his hands were gentle and respectful as he helped her with the stubborn buttons, never lingering or taking advantage. "There you are. Thank you." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly nervous. "Joe, about tonight, I know we have waited and you have been so patient. If you wanted, if you needed, I would understand." Joe knelt in front of her so they were at eye level. "Sarah, look at me. I meant what I said. We have the rest of our lives. I can wait until you are healed, until you are ready, until you want me as much as I want you. There is no pressure, no obligation beyond what you freely choose to give. All right." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "How are you real? How did I get so fortunate? I ask myself the same question about you every day." Joe brushed away her tears with his thumbs. "Now, get into bed and rest. I will be along shortly." Sarah slipped under the covers and Joe tucked them around her carefully. Then he changed into his own nightshirt and climbed in beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. But as had happened in the hotel, they gradually shifted together in sleep, Sarah curling into Joe's warmth and Joe's arms coming around her protectively. It felt natural, right, like their bodies knew they belonged together even if their minds were still catching up. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Sarah spent her mornings with Rosa, learning the routines of the household and the ranch. Despite her injured arm, there were many tasks she could manage. She could help with meal planning. She could read to Rosa while the older woman worked. She could tend the indoor spaces and begin planning changes. The afternoons, Sarah often spent with Joe. He would come in from working with the cattle, and they would sit on the porch together, talking and simply enjoying each other's company. Joe told her about the ranch, about each cow's personality, about his plans for expanding the herd. Sarah shared her observations about the house and property, her ideas for improvements, her growing love for this new life. In the evenings, they would have dinner with Miguel and Rosa or alone together, and then retire to their room. Each night they slept a little closer, growing more comfortable with each other's presence. Joe would often read aloud to Sarah from the small collection of books his mother had left behind, and Sarah would rest against his shoulder, content. 3 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, Sarah woke one morning with a realization. Her arm, while still bound, no longer caused her constant pain. In fact, she had gone the entire previous day without thinking about it much at all. She carefully flexed her fingers and rotated her wrist, feeling only a slight ache instead of the sharp protests of earlier weeks. "Joe," she said softly, knowing he was already awake beside her. "I think I can start using my arm again, carefully, but I think it has healed enough." Joe propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "Are you certain? You should not rush it." "I am certain. It feels different, stronger. I want to try." That afternoon, with Rosa's help, Sarah carefully removed the sling. Her arm felt strange, weak from disuse, but when she slowly straightened it, there was no spike of pain. Just a dull ache that felt manageable. "Start slowly," Rosa cautioned. "A little more each day. You do not want to re-injure it." Sarah heeded the advice, but the freedom of having both arms again, even limited, was glorious. She could help more with cooking. She could begin working in the garden. She could embrace her husband properly for the first time. That night, when Joe came in from the barn, Sarah met him at the door and wrapped both arms around him, pulling him close. Joe froze for a moment in surprise. Then his arms came around her and he held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I have wanted to hold you like this since the moment I saw you," he murmured against her ear. "I have wanted you to," Sarah replied, her voice catching with emotion. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the solid reality of each other's bodies. Then Joe pulled back slightly to look at her face. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, living with you, I have fallen in love with you. Truly, deeply in love. I know it might seem too soon, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Joy exploded in Sarah's chest. "Joe, I love you too. I think I started falling the moment you promised to be gentle with me, and I have been tumbling ever since. You are everything I dreamed of and so much more." Joe cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with all the passion he had been restraining for weeks. Sarah kissed him back just as fervently, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. Heat and need built between them, undeniable and urgent. "Sarah," Joe gasped against her lips, "if we do not stop now, I will not be able to." "Then do not stop," Sarah whispered. "I am healed enough. I want you, Joe. I want to be your wife in every way." Joe searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he swept her up into his arms, careful of her still healing arm, and carried her to their bedroom. He laid her gently on the bed and paused, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed hair back from her face. "I will be gentle," he promised again. "I know," Sarah replied, reaching up to pull him down to her. "I trust you completely." They made love slowly, carefully, with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. Joe was true to his word, gentle and patient, putting Sarah's comfort above his own needs. And Sarah gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, pouring all her love and trust and hope into their union. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard, both smiling. Joe pressed kisses to Sarah's forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Are you all right? Did I hurt you?" "You were perfect," Sarah assured him, running her fingers through his hair. Everything was perfect. Joe pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "I love you, Sarah Kane." "I love you too, Josephine Kane." She tilted her head to look at him. "And I am so grateful I broke my arm." Joe laughed, surprised. "What? Why?" "Because it meant you had to be patient with me. It gave us time to really know each other before we rushed into the physical side of marriage. We built a foundation first, and now everything else is built on that. If I had arrived healthy, we might have married and bedded immediately and missed all that growing together time." Joe considered this and nodded slowly. "You may be right. I had not thought of it that way, but these weeks of just talking and learning each other, they have been precious. I feel like I know you so deeply already. And I know you." Sarah kissed his chest, right over his heart. "We are going to have a wonderful life together, Joe. I can feel it." "Yes," Joe agreed, holding her closer. "Yes, we are." Summer deepened into full heat, and Sarah threw herself into making the ranch truly their home. With Rosa's help and guidance, she began reviving the flower garden, clearing away years of weeds and planting the seeds Rosa had saved. She made curtains for all the windows, cheerful yellow for the kitchen and deep blue for the bedroom. She rearranged furniture and added small touches, a vase of wildflowers on the table, embroidered pillows on the chairs, her mother's Bible on a shelf beside Joe's father's books. The house transformed from a dwelling into a home, and Joe marveled at the change. More than the physical alterations, though, was the atmosphere. There was life in the house now, warmth and laughter and purpose. Sarah sang while she worked, filling the rooms with music. She cooked beside Rosa, filling the air with delicious smells. She waited on the porch each evening for Joe to come in from the range, her face lighting up at the sight of him. Joe found himself hurrying through his work, eager to get back to the house, to Sarah. He had thought he enjoyed his solitary life before, but now he realized he had simply been existing. This was living. One evening in late July, Sarah had surprising news. "Joe, I was talking with Rosa today, and she mentioned that Placerville has a lending library. I was wondering if perhaps we could go to town next week. I would love to get some new books, and I need fabric to make winter curtains for the bedrooms. The ones we have now will not keep out the cold when the weather turns." "Of course," Joe agreed immediately. "We can make a day of it. Have lunch at the hotel, visit the library, whatever you like." Sarah's smile was radiant. "I have something else to ask as well. Rosa mentioned that she and Miguel have not had a proper day off in months. What if we gave them a few days to themselves? We could manage the basic chores, and they could just rest or do whatever they wanted." Joe was touched by her thoughtfulness. "That is a wonderful idea. Let me talk to Miguel about it." Miguel and Rosa protested at first, insisting they were fine, but eventually agreed to take 3 days to rest and enjoy themselves. "You have a good woman there, patron," Miguel told Joe privately. "One who thinks of others. Hold on to her tight." "I intend to," Joe replied with a grin. The trip to Placerville was a delight. Sarah dressed in her best day dress, a pretty lavender affair she had sewn herself, and Joe wore his town clothes. They rode in the wagon, Sarah tucked close against Joe's side, both of them relaxed and happy. In town, they visited the general store first, where Sarah selected fabric and Joe ordered supplies for the ranch. Then they went to the lending library, a small but well-stocked room above the newspaper office. Sarah was in heaven, browsing the shelves and selecting books with the care of someone choosing treasures. "You can take as many as you like," Joe told her, amused by her serious concentration. "I want to choose carefully," Sarah replied. "These will have to last me months until we come back to town." She finally settled on 6 books, a mixture of novels and practical volumes on gardening and animal husbandry. "This one is for you," she said, handing Joe a book on cattle breeding. "I saw you looking at the catalog last week. This has the information you were seeking." Joe was touched that she had noticed and remembered. He kissed her right there in the library, not caring who might see. "Thank you, my love." They had lunch at the Carey house, sitting at the same table where they had shared breakfast the morning after Sarah arrived. "Everything has changed since then," Sarah marveled. "I was so nervous that day, so uncertain. Now I cannot imagine my life any other way." "I was terrified I would disappoint you," Joe admitted, "that you would take one look at me or the ranch and regret coming." "Never," Sarah said firmly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Not for a single moment." On the ride home, Sarah was quiet, leaning against Joe with a small smile on her face. He thought she might be tired from the busy day, but when they were about halfway back to the ranch, she spoke. "Joe, I have been thinking about something, about our future." "What about it?" "About children. We have not really discussed it, but I wanted you to know that I hope we will have them. Several if we are blessed. I always wanted a large family." Joy flooded through Joe. "I want that too. I grew up lonely, being an only child. I always imagined having a house full of children, noise and laughter and chaos." "Good," Sarah said contentedly. "Then we are agreed. Now we just have to wait and see what God provides." As summer turned to autumn, Sarah's hope was realized. She missed her monthly courses in August, and then again in September. By October, there was no doubt. She was carrying their child. Sarah told Joe on a cool evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She simply took his hand and placed it on her still, flat belly. "There is a baby growing here, our baby." Joe's eyes went wide with wonder and something that looked almost like fear. "Are you certain?" "Very certain. Rosa confirmed it. She says I am probably about 3 months along, which means the baby will come in April." Joe pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. Sorry, Sarah. I am so happy I can barely stand it." "Me too," Sarah said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "We are going to be parents, Joe. We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was easy overall. Sarah felt tired and queasy the first few months, but by winter she was blooming with health and energy. Her belly swelled steadily, and Joe became almost comically protective, not wanting her to lift anything heavy or work too hard. "Joe, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Sarah protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But she secretly loved his protectiveness, the way he fussed over her and made sure she was comfortable. Rosa fussed too, preparing special foods and insisting Sarah rest every afternoon. Between the two of them, Sarah felt thoroughly cherished. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Joe took over one of the spare bedrooms and transformed it into a nursery, building a beautiful cradle from oak wood and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Sarah sewed blankets and tiny gowns, marveling at how small they were. Rosa knitted booties and caps, her needles flying. In February, Sarah felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings in her belly. She grabbed Joe's hand and pressed it to the spot. "Wait, stay still, you feel it." They sat frozen for a long moment, and then Joe's face lit up with wonder. "I felt it. Our baby moved." From then on, the baby's movements became stronger and more frequent. Joe would often rest his head on Sarah's belly in the evenings, talking to the child within and marveling when he felt kicks in response. "Our son is going to be a strong one," he said proudly. "Or our daughter," Sarah corrected with a smile. "We do not know yet. Boy or girl, I will love them with everything I have," Joe declared. As April approached, Sarah grew more uncomfortable. Her belly was huge, making simple tasks difficult. She waddled more than walked, and getting out of bed required Joe's assistance. But she remained cheerful, excited for the baby's arrival. "I cannot wait to meet this little one," she told Rosa one afternoon as they sat together sewing. "I have loved being pregnant, but I am ready to hold my baby in my arms." "Soon," Rosa assured her. "Very soon now, I think. That baby has dropped. You are carrying low." Rosa was right. 3 days later, on a sunny April morning, Sarah woke to cramping pains in her belly. By midday, the pains had strengthened into unmistakable contractions. Rosa took charge immediately, sending Miguel to fetch the midwife from town and getting Sarah settled in bed with everything prepared. Joe was a nervous wreck, pacing the main room and jumping every time Sarah made a sound. Miguel finally took pity on him and suggested they go check on the cattle, anything to distract him. But Joe could not bear to be far away, so he stayed, wearing a path in the floor with his worried pacing. The labor was long, lasting through the afternoon and into the evening. Joe sat beside Sarah when Rosa would allow it, holding her hand and letting her squeeze it during contractions. He wiped her face with cool cloths and murmured encouragement when she grew exhausted. "You are doing so well, my love," he told her. "So strong and brave. I am in awe of you." Finally, as night fell, the midwife announced it was time to push. Joe was banished to the other room, where he resumed his pacing with renewed vigor. Miguel sat calmly in a chair, whittling, occasionally commenting that this was all very normal and Sarah would be fine. Joe wanted to believe him, but fear clutched at his heart. Women died in childbirth. It happened. What if something went wrong? What if he lost Sarah? Then, just as he was working himself into a full panic, he heard it. A baby's cry, strong and lusty, filling the house with sound. Joe's legs went weak with relief. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and realized he was crying. Rosa appeared in the doorway, beaming. "You have a son, Josephine. A big, healthy, beautiful son. And Sarah is well. Tired, but well." Joe scrambled to his feet and rushed past her into the bedroom. Sarah lay propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle in her arms. She looked up when Joe entered, and her smile could have lit the whole valley. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Joe approached slowly, almost reverently. Sarah pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny face, red and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair. The baby's eyes were closed, but his little mouth worked as if he were already looking for food. "He is perfect," Joe breathed. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect. He has your chin," Sarah observed. "And I think he will have my nose, but we will have to wait and see about the rest." Joe carefully sat on the edge of the bed, afraid to jostle them. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Sarah said, "I always liked Thomas after my father. Thomas Kane." "What do you think, Thomas Kane?" Joe repeated. "Tommy, I love it." He gently touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when the little fingers curled around his much larger one. "Hello, Thomas. I am your papa. That beautiful woman holding you is your mama. We are so happy you are here." The baby made a small sound, and Sarah laughed softly. "I think he is happy to be here too, or possibly he is hungry. The midwife said to try nursing him soon." Joe stood, giving Sarah privacy, but she caught his hand. "Stay, you are his father. This is something we should all do together." So Joe stayed, sitting beside his wife and son, watching with tender fascination as Sarah awkwardly but successfully nursed their child for the first time. Thomas latched on immediately and fed enthusiastically, making small, satisfied sounds. "He is definitely my son," Joe joked. "Already enjoying his meals." Sarah laughed and then winced. "Everything hurts, but I do not even care. Look at what we made, Joe. Look at our beautiful boy." "I am looking," Joe said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I have never seen anything more beautiful in my life, except perhaps you." "I love you so much, Sarah. Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." "I love you too," Sarah replied. "We are a family now, a real family." The weeks after Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. The baby woke every few hours to eat, leaving Sarah and Joe both sleep-deprived. But neither complained. They took turns walking the floor with him when he was fussy, changed his diapers together, and marveled at every tiny thing he did. Rosa was invaluable, helping with the house and meals so Sarah could focus on recovering and caring for Thomas. Miguel carved the baby a set of wooden toys and declared him the finest boy ever born. The ranch became a place of even greater warmth and love than before. As spring turned to summer, Thomas grew and thrived. His eyes opened to reveal blue, though Rosa said they might change color later. He began to smile, his whole face lighting up when he saw his parents' faces. He discovered his hands and would stare at them for long periods, fascinated by his own fingers. Sarah regained her strength slowly, and soon she was back to managing the household and helping Rosa with the garden. Joe continued his work with the cattle, but he was always eager to come home, to scoop Thomas into his arms and play with him. On a warm June evening, almost exactly a year after Sarah had first arrived in Placerville, they sat together on the porch. Thomas lay on a blanket between them, waving his arms and legs enthusiastically and babbling in his own baby language. The sun was setting in a blaze of gold and orange, and the air smelled of roses from Sarah's now flourishing garden. "You ever think about that day?" Joe asked, taking Sarah's hand. "When you stepped off the stagecoach with your arm in a sling, and I thought my whole world was ending because my bride was hurt." Sarah smiled at the memory. "I think about it often. I was so scared that day, scared you would be angry or disappointed. Instead, you were kind. You promised to be gentle with me, and Joe, you kept that promise. You have been gentle with me every day since." "You made it easy," Joe said. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." Thomas made an especially loud babble as if commenting on their conversation, and both parents laughed. Sarah picked him up and cuddled him close. "And now we have this little miracle, our son, our family." Joe put his arm around both of them, pulling them close. "I used to think I was doing fine on my own, that I had a good life. But Sarah, I was only existing. You taught me what living really means. You and Thomas are everything to me." "And you are everything to us," Sarah replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My brave cowboy who promised to be gentle." They sat together as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky above. Inside the house, lamps glowed warmly. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A cool breeze carried the scent of growing things and earth and home. The years passed gently for the Kane family. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to boy, strong and curious and full of life. When he was 2, Sarah became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1875 they welcomed a daughter. They named her Margaret Rose, Rose for short, and she was the image of her mother with the same auburn hair and green eyes. Thomas adored his baby sister from the moment he met her, always wanting to help care for her and show her his toys. As they grew, they became inseparable playmates, running through the house and around the ranch with the boundless energy of childhood. Joe expanded the cattle operation, and the ranch prospered. Sarah's garden became the talk of the county, with roses and flowers that bloomed spectacularly each year. She also began taking in sewing work, creating beautiful dresses for the women of Placerville and earning a reputation for her skill. Miguel and Rosa continued to be part of their extended family, and when Miguel began to slow down with age, Joe hired another ranch hand but made sure Miguel knew he would always have a place with them. Rosa taught both Thomas and Rose to speak Spanish alongside English, and they called her abuela, grandmother, though there was no blood relation. In 1878, Sarah gave birth to their third child, another son they named Peter. He was a quiet baby who grew into a thoughtful boy, content to sit and watch his older siblings' antics rather than join in. He loved books as his mother did, and could often be found curled in a chair reading when he should have been doing chores. The house that had once seemed so empty to Joe was now filled with noise and laughter and life. Toys littered the floors. Small clothes hung on the washing line. The walls were covered with children's drawings and family photographs. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Joe and Sarah would sit together on the porch as they had on that first night, watching the stars and talking about everything and nothing. These were Joe's favorite times, just him and Sarah, still as in love as they had been that day in the Placerville church. "You have any regrets?" Joe asked one night when they had been married 10 years. "About leaving Boston, about coming west to marry a stranger?" Sarah pretended to consider this seriously. "Well, the breaking my arm part was not ideal." Joe laughed and pulled her close. "No, I suppose not. But everything else. Every single moment since I stepped off that stage coach, no regrets at all. This life, this family, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You kept your promise, Joe. You have been gentle with me, gentle with our children, gentle with everyone you meet. You are a good man, and I am so grateful I get to spend my life with you." "I am the grateful one," Joe insisted. "You took a chance on me on this life. You made our house a home. You gave me children and love and purpose. I was half a person before you arrived, Sarah. You made me whole." They kissed then, a sweet lingering kiss that held a decade of love and commitment. When they parted, Sarah rested her head on Joe's shoulder, and he held her close, both of them at peace. Thomas graduated from the small schoolhouse in Placerville at 16 and chose to stay on the ranch, working alongside his father. He had inherited Joe's love of the land and the cattle, and it was clear he would carry on the family business. When he was 19, he began courting a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Elizabeth, and Joe gave them his blessing. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She helped Sarah with the sewing business and dreamed of opening her own dress shop in town someday. Peter surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a teacher and began studying to take the examination that would qualify him for the position. Miguel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1885, and the entire family mourned him. They buried him on the ranch in a spot with a beautiful view of the valley he had loved, and Rosa went to live in a small house in Placerville near the church. She remained close to the family, visiting often and always welcomed as the grandmother she had become in spirit. Joe found his hair graying and his joints aching on cold mornings, but he still rose each day grateful for the life he had built. Sarah still took his breath away, even with silver threading through her auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes. If anything, he loved her more with each passing year. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1892 with a party at the ranch. Thomas and Elizabeth, now married with 2 children of their own, came. Rose brought the young man she was courting. Peter arrived from Sacramento, where he was teaching at a school. Friends from town made the journey out to the ranch. Rosa came with her son and daughter-in-law. As Joe looked around at the gathering, at the home filled with family and friends and love, he found Sarah watching him with that same gentle smile she had worn the day they met. "Happy anniversary," she mouthed across the room. "I love you," he mouthed back. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, they walked out to the garden that Sarah had created all those years ago. The roses were in full bloom, their scent perfuming the warm June air. They found their favorite bench, installed years ago so they could sit and enjoy Sarah's handiwork, and settled onto it together. 20 years, Sarah marveled. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. The best 20 years of my life, Joe said firmly. And hopefully we will have 20 more, maybe 30. I hope so too, Sarah agreed. She took his hand, studying the calluses and scars that marked a life of hard work. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I arrived with my broken arm?" "I said a lot of things that day," Joe replied with a smile. "You said, 'I will be gentle with you.' And Joe, you have been. Every single day, in every way that matters, you have been gentle and kind and good. I could not have asked for a better husband or partner or father for my children." Joe felt his eyes sting with tears. "And I could not have asked for a better wife, Sarah Kane. You turned my house into a home, my life into a joy. You are my best friend and my greatest love." They sat together in the garden as night fell around them, holding hands and surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch stretched around them, solid and prosperous. In the house behind them, the echoes of their children's laughter still seemed to linger. Above them, stars wheeled across the vast California sky. 2 strangers had met on a dusty street in Placerville 20 years ago, one injured and uncertain, one nervous but hopeful. They had taken a chance on each other, chosen trust over fear, and built something beautiful together. A marriage. A family. A life. And as they sat together in Sarah's rose garden, both knew with absolute certainty that they would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, because they had found something rare and precious in each other. They had found home. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life and the changing seasons. Joe and Sarah grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They became grandparents multiple times over as their children married and started families of their own. The ranch house that had once seemed so quiet and empty was now frequently filled with grandchildren, their voices and laughter echoing through the rooms just as their parents' voices once had. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Joe's body began to slow down. It gave Joe great satisfaction to see his son managing the cattle and the land with skill and care, knowing the ranch would continue to prosper for another generation. Elizabeth proved to be a wonderful daughter-in-law, and she and Sarah became close friends as well as family. Rose eventually opened her dress shop in Placerville, realizing her dream. It became the most popular establishment for ladies' clothing in the county, and Sarah helped there several days a week, the 2 of them working side by side just as Sarah had once worked beside Rosa. Rose married her beau, a banker named William, and they built a house in town close to the shop. Peter found his calling as a teacher, eventually becoming the headmaster of a school in Sacramento. He married a fellow teacher, a brilliant woman named Catherine, and they had one daughter who they doted on. Though Peter lived further away than his siblings, he visited the ranch often, always making sure his own daughter knew her grandparents and the land where her father had grown up. Rosa lived to the remarkable age of 83, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she passed in 1893, she was buried beside Miguel on the ranch, and the entire community turned out for her funeral. Sarah spoke at the service, her voice breaking as she described the woman who had welcomed her with open arms, taught her so much, and become like a mother to her. Joe and Sarah continued their evening ritual of sitting together on the porch, though now they both moved more slowly and needed cushions for their aging joints. They would sit and watch the sunset, holding hands, sometimes talking and sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence that came from decades of companionship. "You remember when we could work from dawn to dusk without stopping?" Joe joked one evening when his back was particularly stiff. "Vaguely," Sarah replied with a laugh. "Though I am not sure I would want to go back even if I could. I am rather fond of afternoon naps now." "And early bedtimes," Joe added. "Who knew we would become such old folk? Speak for yourself," Sarah protested with mock indignation. "I am still quite spry." Joe pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You are as beautiful as the day I first saw you stepping off that stagecoach." "Now I know your eyesight is going," Sarah teased, but she smiled and snuggled closer to him. In the summer of 1899, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. Their children had offered to come and celebrate with them, but Joe and Sarah had declined, wanting a day just for themselves. They spent the morning in Sarah's garden, which was more magnificent than ever. Years of careful tending had created something truly spectacular, with roses in every color climbing trellises and filling the air with perfume. Visitors to the ranch always asked to see the famous garden, and Sarah was always happy to show it off. "This was my mother's dream," Sarah said as they walked slowly among the blooms. "A garden full of roses." She said roses were symbols of love, that they grew more beautiful with time and care, just like a good marriage. "I think she would be happy to know I finally created the garden she always wanted." "I think she would be proud of you in every way," Joe said firmly. "You have built a wonderful life, Sarah. You have been an amazing mother, a brilliant businesswoman with your sewing, a pillar of our community. You took a chance coming west, and you made the absolute most of it." Sarah looked up at the man she had married almost 3 decades ago. His hair was completely white now, his face lined with years of sun and work. But his eyes were still the same warm brown, still looking at her with all the love and tenderness of their youth. "I got lucky," she said simply. "I could have arrived to find a cruel man or an indifferent one. Instead, I found you, the best man I have ever known." They spent the afternoon sitting on the porch, watching Thomas work with the cattle in the distance, talking about their children and grandchildren, reminiscing about the years they had shared. As evening approached, Sarah prepared Joe's favorite meal, and they ate together at the table where they had shared thousands of meals over the years. "To us," Joe toasted with his water glass, "and to many more years together." "To us," Sarah echoed, clinking her glass against his. That night they lay in bed together, Sarah curled against Joe's side as she had been doing for nearly 3 decades. His arm was around her, holding her close, and her head rested on his shoulder. "Joe," Sarah said quietly into the darkness. "Yes, my love. If I could go back and do it all again, knowing everything that would happen, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment. This life with you has been perfect." Joe pressed a kiss to her forehead. Not perfect, he corrected gently. We have had our share of struggles and sorrows. But it has been perfect for us, and I would not change a thing either. You are the best decision I ever made, Sarah Kane. The very best. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together. The new century arrived with celebrations throughout California and the rest of the nation. Joe and Sarah, now in their 50s, greeted the year 1900 with their entire extended family gathered at the ranch. 3 generations filled the house with noise and laughter and love. The grandchildren ran through the rooms, playing games and getting into minor mischief. The adult children caught up with each other, swapping stories and news. And Joe and Sarah moved among them all, the heart of this family they had created, making sure everyone was fed and happy and felt welcome in their home. As midnight approached on New Year's Eve, they all gathered outside despite the winter cold. Someone had built a bonfire and they stood around it, bundled in coats and blankets. When the clock struck 12, marking not just a new year but a new century, they all cheered and hugged and kissed. Joe pulled Sarah close and kissed her soundly. "Happy New Year, my love. Here is to the new century and to spending it together." "Happy New Year," Sarah replied, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I love you, Joe Kane, today and always." Around them, their family celebrated, but for a moment it was just the two of them. 2 people who had started as strangers brought together by letters and necessity, who had built something extraordinary through kindness, patience, and love. The cowboy and his mail-order bride, who had arrived with a broken arm and a hopeful heart, who had heard him promise to be gentle and had trusted him to keep that promise. And he had, every day for nearly 30 years. They had created a family, a legacy, a love that would endure through the generations. Their grandchildren would have children of their own someday, and they would tell them the story of how their great-grandparents met, about the brave woman who traveled across the country with a broken arm and the kind man who promised to be gentle with her, about how they fell in love and built a life together in the wild, beautiful California foothills. It was a good story, a true story, and most importantly, it was their story. And as Joe and Sarah stood together under the stars, surrounded by the family they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that they had lived a good life. A life full of purpose and meaning and, above all, love. The years ahead would bring both joys and sorrows, as all lives do. But they would face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart, just as they had from the very beginning. Because they had made promises to each other, and they had kept those promises faithfully, and they always would until their final days and beyond. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished. This was home,